What happened in Venezuelan recent elections and the later street demonstrations? Well, first of all, the elections were a shock, and not just because of the fraud during or after the elections. It was a shock because uh, they were organized in the midst of a dictatorship regime which has banned left parties and which choose which party could or couldn't present to compete in the elections. So uh, it's well known internationally that Corina Machado was banned to compete, and then another candidate had to step up. But that's what happened with the right politicians. But what about the left? Earlier, very early, the Chavez regime had banned all political parties that had the word socialist in it. So the only party that could have the word socialist would be the Chavist party, the official party, which has nothing to do with socialism. But I will talk about that in another video. All other parties that had the word socialist in its name were banned, and of course, they couldn't compete in this election. One example of the parties that had suffered this was Marea Socialista. Then the Communist Party still survived because the Communist Party didn't have the word socialist in its name. But lately, uh, the government intervened the Communist Party and placed officialist leaders in the Communist Party. So that left opposition was wiped off uh, also. As left opposition was eliminated, the discontent against the government was capitalized by more right wing organizations. But this right wing organization went on with elections even when they were shocked from the beginning. Why did they do that? Well, what you have to keep in mind is that um, these parties, these right political parties, uh, want a way out of Chavism, but they want to have an institutional change, and they want the fall of Chavism be clearly separated from any street demonstrations. Because if Chavism falls in the midst of workers' protests and streets demonstrations, well, they will inherit this mobilization. And street demonstrations, these week street demonstrations, are not just about the election and the fraud. They are also about the economic and social crisis in Venezuela. They are about the workers' situations, workers that are earning just $5 a month salary. And these are agreements made and forced by the government. So there is a social unrest and labor unrest in Venezuela. And if, as a product of this social and labor unrest in Venezuela, the government falls, the new government will have to respond to that and give answers that they don't want to give and take steps that they don't want to take. So they want to take power, but in an rather institutional form, and they don't want Chavism to go down on the streets. That's why, after the election and after the fraud, Corina Machado didn't call for any demonstrations. The demonstration and mass mobilizations in the streets were spontaneous, were um, an popular outburst, and just later on, after the mobilization took place, Corina Machado called for a demonstration. But she called for a demonstration at the ONU building, at the United Nations building, while people's demonstrations were heading towards Miraflores Palace, the government's building. So Machado tried to redirect uh, people's mobilization towards international organizations and not to confront directly to the government. And the formal request to the government to present the acts of the election is a rather institutionalized form to redirect the conflict that in first place was set in the streets. Corina Machado wants people out of the streets because if her party would govern in some moment, she doesn't want people to be in the streets. One thing you should know about this week's demonstration is that they were very strong in the most popular neighborhoods. The neighborhoods where the poorest sectors of the working class live were the ones who uh, began the demonstrations and where they were strongest. One example is the Petare, which is well known for being one of the neighborhoods which started demonstrations in support of Chavez in Chavism early days. Now, these neighborhoods that previously were strongholds of Chavism are protesting against Maduro's regime. And the protests are in all over the country. If you compare these mobilizations with the ones of the Caracazo, which were located in Caracas City, the capital of the country, here they are widespread all over the country. Small cities, big cities, they all had this mobilization and they were all um, this follow this pattern where the poorest neighborhoods which previously were very supportive of Chavism were the one who which people mobilized the most. So mobilizations were very strong in the more popular and poorest working class neighborhoods and were spread all over the country. How the government react to this? Well, the government sent the military forces to repress these protests and also especially send the parastate forces. Parastate repression has been very strong in Chavism in the late years, and we have seen it acting these days in the streets. Uh, uh, people who is armed and who goes to the streets to terrorize manifestants. And this has become the um, main support of the regime, which has faced some problems with the military force, because sometimes the military force, not the hierarchy of the military force that is very strongly supporting the government, but the soldiers, the rank and file members of the military force, they suffer famine and their families suffer famine, just like the rest of the working class in Venezuela. So in some cases, they didn't want to open fire against protesters. Uh, that's why the government relied on the parastate repression so much. At least 16 protesters have been killed in the streets, and many have been detained. They have been incarcerated, and they are being placed in high security jails. Um, they are even forced uh, to say phrases praying Chavism in the jails they are, and this is um, shown in public television of the Chavism, trying to, I think, trying to put fear into the rest of the population, because he's showing in TV really a fascist act, having imprisoned manifestants just to protest in the streets, and then showing them in jail and being forced to shout out loud Chavist phrases. Well, that's the situation now. It's changing rapidly, so anything could happen. But I ask you to follow the news, and at least follow all the news, and listen to what everyone has to say, and to know what is happening in Venezuela, and to share what's happening in Venezuela is not to help the right. Uh, in Latin America, the right has grown because there wasn't a left option to the bourgeois nationalist regimes like Kirchnerism, Lulism, or Chavism, where there's no left opposition, or a strong left opposition towards these bourgeois nationalist regimes. The right grows. So the right can be the only sector that uh, takes notice of the demands of the working class in Venezuela. Leftists should take notice them, and solidarize with people who is demonstrating in Venezuela against a bourgeois nationalist dictatorship that was Maduro regime is. And always remember, we are not calling, no, I'm Argentinian, and no Venezuelan, Argentinian, Brazilian, or any Latin American country would call for another country's intervention. We don't want to. We don't want that. But what leftist parties in this country want is leftist solidarity, uh, class over nations. Class solidarity is a socialist tradition, and we want to recover that. Well, that's all for today. I will try to make a video to keep you posted from other news from Venezuela and other Latin American countries. Thanks for watching.